It's the final 8-bit episode of This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Passport to Adventure, a new SCUMM doco is in the works.
Herculean efforts in retro.
Hail to the Catacombs, baby. Duke 3D is 30, and we learn about the first texture-mapped FPS.
And Clive Sinclair's AI predictions, along with, of course, the latest racing game news coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 14th of February, 2026. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
So, guys,
hello.
We've filled it. It's binary 11111111. This is episode 255, Hex FF. It is the final episode of This Week in Retro that fits in 8 bits. 9-bit all the way from here.
Oh, no.
We're going into the 16-bit era.
Nice.
Or do we do 9?
Well, 9-bit. I mean, we could get away with 9 for a while, but...
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And also, happy Valentine's Day, people. I'm sure that you and your partner will sit down to watch This Week in Retro over a romantic meal.
As you do.
That's peak relationship right there.
And I have, a couple of weeks ago, I was moaning about things not working. I fixed everything. No, I haven't fixed everything. I fixed more things. My ST works, my Amiga works, the PCs all come on. Some productivity at last.
Can you come around and fix my aircon?
Aye, sure. Why not?
Wait, is it still down?
It's still down. They're meant to come tomorrow at time of recording. Here's some irony for you, because it's been hot. They may cancel the call out tomorrow because tomorrow is forecast for rain. And they can't work outside on the roof in the rain. I can't believe the fixing of my aircon is potentially being delayed because of rain in Perth, far out. Anyway.
There has to be more than one service company in Perth. I know it's isolated, but...
I won't phone this one again. Let's put it that way.
All right.
A little voice clip that certainly Jason will remember from the original Baldur's Gate is "Die, scum!" from the Knolls. Scum, of course, is not usually a good thing, but we all know it brought us some wonderful adventures, and it's time to talk a little bit and do a little bit of a reminder and some news regarding it. So, back in 1987, Ron Gilbert and Arik Wilmunder decided that due to their experiences making the game Labyrinth for, at the time, LucasArts, or was it Lucasfilm at that point?
Lucasfilm Games.
Lucasfilm then became
Lucasfilm
Games. Yeah, Lucasfilm Games. That coding in assembly was becoming too cumbersome, so they created the script creation utility for Maniac Mansion. The Maniac Mansion was a fantastic game, but it wasn't, I don't think, what SCUMM would become. Maniac Mansion really is a great game, but I don't think it's beautiful in the same way that later games would become in the case of Monkey Island or Loom, or that sort of combination of underground comic and 50s cartoon that Sam and Max and Day of the Tentacle would, and the kind of relaxed but engrossing gameplay that those would deliver. And I don't take that as a criticism of Maniac Mansion and Zach McCracken. Remember, they were being made in the late 80s for target machines on the 8-bit as well as the 16-bit, whereas when you got to Monkey Island and later, they were the horizons were broadened. Now, SCUMM was used to create 12 full LucasArts adventures. It's not the only technology they created. They did IMUs as well as bile, phlegm, and spit. But it's by far the one with the most famous legacy.
Hang on a second, Dave. Are those really all infrastructure techs that are part of SCUMM?
Yes. Bile, phlegm, and spit.
You know, like, it really does stand out sometimes how terrible naming conventions were for some things. And this is not the only genre, but boy.
Yeah, sometimes when source code is about to be released, people have to go back through and look through the comments just to make sure. Yeah. But SCUMM is, of course, the one with the big famous legacy. And thanks to Moss RC on the subreddit, we now know about Passport to Adventure, the SCUMM story, which is a documentary that will be crowdfunded. It's written and directed by Richard Moss and produced by Daniel Richardson, so I assume that Moss RC on our subreddit is Richard Moss himself. And from their own blurb, the SCUMM story is expected to run close to 3 hours and feature a game-by-game developer-led retrospective featuring 20-plus interviews with Lucasfilm Games and LucasArts icons such as confirmed guest Ron Gilbert, as well as Zach McCracken designer David Fox, SCUMM engine programmer Eric Wilmunder, Monkey Island Freddie Fish co-writer and designer Tammy Borowick, and background artist Mark Ferrari, with many more to come. And I know those names because those are all important names in the SCUMM story. Those are great names. I think the names you want, other than maybe getting George Lucas himself on, I don't think you're going to get any other names that are as important as that. So I hope it turns out great. But there's more SCUMM stuff to talk about. A project that started way back in 2001 when Ludwig Strigius was trying to get what at the time would be old games, which strikes as weird now because these are 10-year-old games, and these days 10-year-old isn't even old for games. They're still getting patched. But back then, in 2001, getting a game from 1993 to work was, what are you going that ancient relic for? But he was trying to get them to work, and he ended up, instead of creating an emulator, he created a platform to use the data files, which meant that as long as you got the new engine working, you can use the games. And it's an approach we've seen a few games do now. So we've got Exalt for Ultima, or Open Morrowind, or the Force engine for Dark Forces, or Open Age for Age of Empires, or as we discussed a long time ago on here, X-Wing VM or TIE Fighter Total Conversion. But I don't think I realise it's not the first time we've seen it. And I think they're following in the footsteps of Jason.
Yeah, Infocom was so efficient at shipping the same game on so many platforms because they developed something called the Z Machine, which was a virtual machine that was purpose-built for the business of being a text adventure environment. So Infocom just had to develop their game code once and then port the Z Machine interpreter to all the different platforms. And SCUMM ended up being very similar in that, the scripting and animation instructions were platform neutral. You just needed a different front end to handle the graphics and sound and I/O on every platform you wanted to ship a SCUMM game on. And Sierra had a very similar concept too with their AGI and later SCI games.
Yeah. So SCUMM VM is way more than this now. And it now supports over 500 games. And over the last 25 years, lots of new engines have been added to it. So they would have started off with a SCUMM engine and then added on other engines to it. And the latest annual release on the 31st of January this year, 2026, which is now called 2026.1.0, named like a version. I'm not
been waiting so long to do that one.
Yep, I have been. Has added more engines.
Yeah, I meant that dev team. They're just sitting there. They're waiting to press commit on GitHub for that one.
Heart of China, Dark Seed, The Adventures of Willie Beamish, The Last Express, and loads more. Their page now says they support 325 adventure games, which means, of course, that there's lots of games that aren't adventure games that are kind of adjacent to adventure games that are supported. Some of the Ultima series, for example, Moonbase Commander, Another World, Eye of the Beholder, are examples of games that aren't the typical point and click. And the end result is a platform-agnostic way of playing hundreds of amazing games, because you don't just have to do it on a Windows PC. You've got Linux, Mac, even an Atari ST version of SCUMM VM. Lots of different platforms can play it. But that's not all. Our friends at EXO have a pack for SCUMM VM. The last release was around this time last year, and they typically do the pack once a year after the SCUMM VM update. But there's already so much in it. It's a miracle of modern preservation, and broadly speaking represents probably the types of games that I'm into most. If I only had SCUMM VM to play for the rest of my life, I'd have a world of games still to play. But back to the documentary, though. Do you think you'd want to watch it? And how do you feel about crowdfunding this type of thing?
I like to watch documentaries, even though this kind of game isn't my thing. It's still fun to learn the history in this kind of way. In terms of crowdfunding, though, a lot of work goes into even the most simple video. So assuming the results are much better than something you'd see on YouTube for free, I've got no issue whatsoever with people being paid for their efforts to produce something that's really polished as a final product. And am I right in thinking Rubber Keyed Wonder was crowdfunded? Is that how that was put together? And that's
almost certain.
And that's been really well received and then gone on to streaming services as well. So, yeah, I'm totally behind that. It does take a lot of effort. And keep in mind, this isn't just, again, somebody on YouTube reading Wikipedia and, sitting in front of a camera. They would literally be doing all the research, getting the interviews in place, getting the overlay legally, any extra footage they need for that kind of thing, with full permissions. Anything like that is a massive project. And it costs money to do. So absolutely.
Yeah, talking about to SCUMM VM first, it's one of those things that I took my eye off it for a long, long time. Like I remember when it was first coming out and the idea like, oh, okay, that's nice. You can play the SCUMM games on, Dreamcast or whatever. That's cool. And then I took my eye off it for, I don't know, a decade or so, and then looked at it again. And yes, they'd added all of these different engines. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's nice. And thank you. It just was really, really surprising that they'd stretched it so far beyond that, literal LucasArts engine or, series of engines, because to your point about like Loom and things like that, Loom's mechanics wouldn't work on the original Maniac Mansion, SCUMM interpreter. They made some changes behind the scenes. Would I watch it? Absolutely. I was a little surprised that the project existed, but obviously, anything Lucas does have a lot of, footprint and mind share, and, certain game series have, gone on to, kind of have a second or third act like Sam and Max. So I guess I just hadn't fully appreciated how much the push there was for a retrospective on this kind of thing. As to like the crowdfunding concept, to Chris's point, it doesn't hurt when people get paid for their hard work. Patreon.com/thisweekinretro. Did they say though? Like, did they say anything? Because I didn't see how much they want to raise, how much they want per person signing up. I just saw like sign up for a wait list to get info later.
Yeah, so this is the pre-crowdfunding stage. This is the get some interest, get some feedback and what people want to have in it. Make sure they're doing that something's aligned, make sure there's enough interest for it. And then when they'll launch the crowdfunding at the right point. So I'd imagine we'll come back to this as it progresses just to let people know it's happening.
Yeah. I mean, it's something with a narrow audience, so having it be, by the fans, for the fans is sort of what crowdfunding exists for. So in principle, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I did get my fingers burnt, though, on a crowdfunded doco where the documentary is been finished, and it's been finished for a long time. They're years behind in giving out the reward. In other words, giving the documentary to people that paid for it. They're years behind, and they're waiting until they've sold it to streaming networks, which makes me feel, hang on, I paid for this. Yeah, it's there for me, but you won't give me it because it will make it less profitable for you to sell it to streaming, or less attractive to sell it to streaming networks. I felt as a little bit dishonest, and it's made me think about this in a different way. Really what you're doing is you're helping a project take place that wouldn't take place if the initial crowdfunding wasn't there. So it becomes a little bit of a different decision. That, if I think about it that way, it makes me probably still likely to back this and say, okay, I'm happy to pay for this to happen, because if people don't, it won't happen. And just accept that, okay, further down the line, you might be able to get this for free on Netflix or whatever, or see it on YouTube. But yeah, I get that. I will update you in Housekeeping when this goes live. But it isn't the only doco on the horizon. There's one that's actually much more closer to being released, and it's from twirler and big EXO contributor Dutch Magic. He's been working in this in between EXO Win9X and Demo Scene. It is intended to preserve the actual development stories behind classic adventure games told by the people who made them. It's hosted by Josh Mandel, and each season will focus on a single adventure game series. The first is going to be Leisure Suit Larry. So, of course, it's going to have Allo in it. There's a teaser trailer available now, which hopefully Duncan can show you just now. But the first one, luckily, happens to be getting released today as you watch this on Valentine's Day. So hopefully Dutch will reply to this with a link as a comment to the episode when it goes live. And I did ask him about it directly. I had this to say. He said, so just to let you know, my intention for this series is the fact that there are these developers that created these games when there was no knowledge about how to create a game. I think that Allo is the oldest graphic adventure game developer. I'm trying to capture their ideas and decisions around these games while talking about them and have them watch the gameplay. So that's interesting as well. We're watching that later on today as you watch this show. We are sponsored this way by PCBWay.com. PCBWay are the premier fabrication place to go for PCBWays. In fact, we're going to mention them a couple of times later on today because they've come up a couple of times. But what we like about PCBWay isn't just the PCB manufacturing, the CNC milling, the 3D printing, and all the other things they do. It's the shared projects.
Yeah, there's always interesting shared projects, which are things that are shared by members of the community. You can order them as is. You can contribute to the designs. This time around, there's a retro-futuristic hybrid clock. It's just based on a Raspberry Pico 2 and a couple of displays and a board that kind of houses the whole thing. I scrolled down a bit. There are recipe sites out there that infamously have when I was a young lad and my father took me fishing, he taught me the secrets of time and jasmine. And this one actually has a kind of a long winding story about the fascination with clocks and how this thing came to be. So if you like a bit of story with your shared project and you want a hybrid digital clock, you can also kind of get immersed in the creator's mindset. There's also, it's a bit practical and proletarian, but if you have an older Commodore 64, there's a halfway decent chance that the PLA chip might go bad one of these days, and PCBWay has you covered with a version that's based on 2 GAL chips. These are typically drop-in replacements that work just fine, but if your C64 is going flaky and you've ruled out things like the RAM chips, it's very frequently the PLA. So it's a handy replacement that you can order straight from PCBWay. And also, if you're a big fan of the Zilog CPUs, there's a very interesting Z80 MBC2. It's a homemade Z80 computer in a mere 4 integrated circuit chips. It's got the design for that. The Z80, of course, has demolished all world records in terms of being kind of the home for new ongoing development all these many years later. So if you want something that's based on just a Z80, looks like a small FPGA and RAM chip and a little support logic chip, you can be part of that project. That and many, many more on PCBWay.com.
Thank you for sponsoring us.
I'm taking a look this week at a few stories of significant efforts in retro development, which by their nature are going to be servicing a niche audience, but still impress. First up is a bright spot for those of you who are still firing up a PowerPC-based machine on a regular basis. It started out as a tough 2026 for fans of the PowerPC architecture, as news recently broke that one of the most popular and enduring uses of a PowerPC-powered console is going away, as Netflix is dropping support for PlayStation 3 viewing on March the 2nd, or the 2nd of March if you prefer. Yeah, Chris.
I'm just going to add PlayStation 3 to the list of machines I didn't realize were PowerPC based.
Just obviously, the PS3 has been perfectly capable of streaming video from Netflix all this time, but they've said enough is enough. Move on to, I don't know, a Roku that you got from somebody back in 2013. But it's not all obsolescence, and we can't really say early retirement for PowerPC. Let's just say deferred retirement for PowerPC machines. Squelch 411 shared news posted on the long-running blog for retro Macintosh users called Low End Mac that there's now a new browser for PowerPC Macs. Now, if you're like me and the march of time is starting to blur together, let me put this in perspective. We are now very, very close to the 20th anniversary of the final Macintosh model driven by a PowerPC processor first shipping. So that's how long ago this transition was happening. This new web browser is called PowerFox. It actually has support for the past 2 generations of Mac processor. There's both an Intel build and a PowerPC build. Until recently, one needed an Intel Mac with at least macOS 10, 10.6, macOS X 10.6. You know what I mean. The latest Leopard beta extends support down to PowerPC G5 and G4 Macintoshes and can, in some cases, support one operating system version earlier, 10.5. The PowerFox browser is a creation of a coder who goes by the name of Jasny. Speaking of Z's, as we sometimes do, there's 3 of those. I don't know if they're Z's or Z's, but Jazz was born here, so it's probably a Z. Anyway, it offers a lot of modern conveniences and features demanded by modern websites, including TLS 1.3 security. If you remember a little while ago, we talked about things like the Sega Dreamcast browser, and we learned through that reporting that sometimes they're perfectly viable browsers that are stopped not by rendering features, but by encryption requirements. Now, Firefox reportedly gives users of older Macs a more contemporary browsing experience, and that includes WebGL, OpenGL acceleration, contemporary versions of JavaScript support, modern emoji suites, and more. The Low-End Mac article includes details on the experience of visiting some major websites today on these older Macs. YouTube is reportedly pretty good on G5 Macs. Hey, even 720p high-definition playback, and was quoted as being usable on G4. Presumably that's standard def. Standard Google search worked, as does Google Maps. This is an early release, and various users are reporting issues with the browser on certain graphics cards and OS combinations. And there are certainly a lot of challenges for any lone coder to deal with, let alone deal with in something as massive as the web browsing experience of 2026. So, for a great deal of work in pushing past the limitations of age-old Safari, Chrome, or Firefox on these very aged machines, we salute the Herculean effort of Jasny's PowerFox. So, guys,
it's easy for you to say.
Yeah, it is now. What was the most objectively impractical machine you ever tried to use a web browser on for more than a couple seconds? Like, I kind of liked the Arachne graphical browser for DOS way back when. You have anything similar?
I remember using it on a mobile phone when internet and mobile phones became kind of mass market, or Nokia's in the year 2000, kind of this WAP, which WAP had a different meaning, that acronym back then. It was not a good experience. In fact, it was a terrible, terrible experience. And I have a feeling that for some reason, if we'd been stuck with that technology, if we'd been one of these retro futurism kind of things where that was all we got, and 20 years later we still had the same Nokia displays and the same thing, it would have been better. Because a lot of what we wanted to do on the internet was just getting little bits of data, finding out a football score, finding out the weather, finding out if a train's been delayed, looking at an email or a text message. And it could have ended up being polished enough to be good, instead of where it was when I remember doing it, having to type in complex setup things and it not working right. So it felt as if it was shoved onto a phone that was never designed to do it. So I did also use a DOS browser. I don't know if it was Arachne or not. I don't know. I used it very briefly, just out of nosiness. And it left me thinking the same thing. These days, our web browsing is full of bling and cruft and slop. The website is generated when you ask for it on the remote server, and it's slow. And I want to go back to text only, quick as it possibly could be. And that's what makes me think that these things might have been better. But the battle's lost. There's no way we're going to do that now.
That's a really good slant on it. Actually, I think it continues in terms of impractical machines. PS3, I tried to use the browser on that. Horrible experience trying to type in a URL using the PS3 controller. That continues into the PS4 era. I'm sure it continues into the PS5 era, but I don't have one. But the modern TV behind me, no, I've used the browser on the TV. It's there, and it's just horrible trying to go through all the letters, blah, blah, blah. Hate it. Absolutely hate it.
Dave, that parallel universe where WAP kind of becomes the dominant form, because whatever it was, 6-7 years later, Twitter kind of catches fire, and so much of social media gets boiled down to you've got to pack it into this small format. You've got to use a lot of kind of abbreviations and code phrases and so forth. So that could have happened. I think ad surfaces actually partially explain why it didn't, because it's tough to pack a nice ad into the WAP experience. But that's
perhaps why the appeal is there, because you can't get the adverts in. And you can't get told things you didn't want to see. Just give me what I wanted to know. Thank you very much, which is not the internet these days.
And next up from Trevor Keverson is a hack that gets more retro the more you dig into it. The submission was entitled "Bypassing an Old Parallel Port Dongle." And I actually thought back to the Leaderboard Golf story that I did a short while ago. There wasn't really time or need to dwell on it then, but Leaderboard was my first, and I'll wager many other people's first ever brush with hardware copy protection, which has to be plugged into the computer for a piece of software to run properly. And these devices have become known as dongles. So in addition to being a way to discourage pirates, dongles were, and in many cases still are, popular forms of protection when a product has rather specialized appeal, and there's really a small defined market, meaning like there are people out there who really need the product and would pay if they had to, but they'd really rather not if they could find a way around it. So the story is on the blog of Dimitri Brandt, who is a self-described software engineer living in Boston, Massachusetts, who works for the Wikimedia Foundation on the Wikipedia Android app. Brandt's article, Defeating a 40-Year-Old Copy Protection Dongle, is the kind of legacy enterprise software story that's the stuff of nightmares. Brandt was tasked with helping a friend modernize their business software, which was still running on Windows 98. An accounting package that runs on Windows 98, oh, that's very old, you may say. Oh no, it's older than that. The software was written in the ancient RPG language, which arguably has worse publicity than COBOL and has nothing to do with Ultima. Sorry, Dave. RPG, for Report Program Generator, was introduced in 1959. It's really not common in the desktop world, but there was an RPG package that this accounting firm really needed. It was running in the RPG2 variant, which is so modern it came out in 1969. And standing in the way of this thing being migrated to another computer was a device sitting on a classic 25-pin parallel port with a pass-through and a very old worn label with minimal remaining info. And Brandt documents the process that he goes through to backtrack the origins of the software, leads to a compiler for this RPG2 language from a company called Software West with a 1997 copyright date, which is pretty remarkable given that's almost 30 years after RPG2 first came out. So Brandt says the application is designed more like an IBM mainframe program than a desktop program. I'll take his word on that, but it seems logical. And the dongle seems to be from a completely different company known as Software Security, Inc. So he does a lot of trial and error, then software disassembly with a program called Rico, and Brandt works out where the parallel port access lives and tries to verify the presence of the dongle. So in the long run, the fix, which is basically finding the magic number that the software is hoping to find on the parallel port, and then just inserting a 4-byte patch, which tells the routine what it's expecting to find, so the protected programs will agree to run even when there's nothing on the parallel port, or on a modern computer, no parallel port at all. So, this hack is a win. Brandt says he plans to post an anonymized version of this custom accounting application online shortly. I feel a little let down not knowing what happened next. We know he did this hack so that the program could be run in a virtual machine, but is this RPG2 application being kept alive for the company's use even longer, or was it just virtualized long enough to capture its secrets and recreate its workflow in something more modern? I hope there will be a follow-up soon. So salute to Dimitri Brandt for putting in the time and having the know-how to get around this tricky challenge for that friend's company.
Who doesn't love a dongle? I even love the word dongle. It's a fun word. And I do remember that they existed for games for a short time. And by the time I get leaderboard on my Amstrad CPC, there was no dongle with that because they'd given up. They'd realized it doesn't really do much. Unless you have extremely complicated logic inside the dongle, all they can really do is pass a protection check and say, yes, the dongle's pleasant, or no, it's not. Unless you do something really wildly complicated, like have the dongle do some kind of complex coding that would make the software malfunction without it, which I don't even believe has been done, then they don't really do much. But the dongle I do have my eye on, which I've been trying to get, which I haven't managed to get, is for Bat2, the Koshan conspiracy for the Atari ST. Not only was the dongle the protection check, and they did do a protection dongle for the Amiga version of the PC, I believe, as well, but on the Atari ST uniquely, it was an extra sound device. It was literally a sound card. It was called the MV16 sound cartridge. I've never held one in my hand. It's a 16-voice, 12-bit quality device and took the load off the CPU, so it really was a decent sound card, and it came with a game for no extra cost. Sadly, though, it didn't end up being the standard for the ST, probably because it came out in 1992, towards the end of the ST's life. Had this maybe come out with, 6 or 7 different games in 1987, 88, maybe everyone would have had one. But Gadget UK has done a build of it, which is linked in the show notes. And if you want one yourself, there is a modern recreation of it, which you can go to PCBWay.com, the shared library there, again in the show notes, and you can get it made. You can get one produced yourself. There's been some enhancements made to it to reduce the noise and so on. And I'll probably make one through PCBWay because it's fascinating. There's even trackers for the Atari ST that use it, so you can have this fantastic sound coming out of your Atari ST that the ST normally couldn't do.
Nice. I never came across dongles, but I do remember my first IT admin job. I think I just joined just after some of the software they were using had phased out the need for dongles. And it was in the design studio. So I can't remember if it was Adobe that used them or if it was Quark Express or 3D Studio Max. One of those products. But anyway, fortunately, I joined and the version they were using didn't need the dongle, but the ones they'd had before. This is sort of mid-90s. But the dongle that interests me to this day, because as we all know, the one piece of software that any Amiga user always pirated was Xcopy, and the original version had a dongle. And in my head is the wonderment of, if you have the legitimate dongle, will it then be able to copy protected games? I don't think it will. I think it was just a check, like you say, Dave, to unlock the software. But I don't know, because didn't some software houses use that to do their duplication run?
Well,
right?
I know that at least for the ST, you could get add-ons and it connected to the floppy drive through this add-on,
right,
which controlled it, and it let the floppy drive do things that your normal ST couldn't do. I believe, I'm a bit ropey, I'm not certain on this, and someone perhaps will correct me on it, I'm not sure, but I think through dongles you could do more with the floppy drive than you could normally do, and that might enable you to do protection, like, I don't know, fuzzy bits or something on it. I don't really know, but maybe the Xcopy dongle did more, I don't know.
See, like, in these days we'd use a grease weasel. Back then when they were doing the original production run, they didn't have a grease weasel, right? So it was done somehow. So part of me always wonders, if I have the dongle for Xcopy, maybe it'll work better. I don't think it will.
And to round off the leaderboard stuff, Dave, to your point that a lot of dongles aren't doing anything particularly complicated. The leaderboard one was just a resistor that sat on the cassette port. So really all it was doing was simulating having pressed play on a data set. So if you had a data set, you could just press play on it and you can get past this copy protection. Yeah. And finally, Chromanticore shared a Tom's Hardware article about a new chatbot written in Z80 assembly. And it's available in both a Spectrum and a CP/M operating system format.
What kind of Spectrum? Say it.
It's a ZX Spectrum, but it runs on a Z80. I'm willing to compromise.
Correct. Yeah,
correct way of saying
compromise
it.
All of us are correct, even me.
Yeah. So it's called the Z80 Micro LM, a nod to not being as large as a large language model. And in the words of its creator, Harry R., quote, "The root behind this project was the question, how small can we go while still having personality, and can it be trained or fine-tuned easily?" Unquote. So there's both a 20 questions build version and a chatbot build. 20 questions being the game where, you are asked, is it orange? Yes or no? Everything's a yes/no question, and it narrows down to, and it turns out that with 20 yes/no questions, you can actually identify a lot of things. I was able to get the chatbot build running in the CP/M emulator that's also provided by the creator. I have to say, I was less than impressed with its performance compared to, like the old Eliza, fake therapist, or really any chatbot you might care to name. The notes do talk about the ability to build additional training data, but as it was shipped, I did not get a whole ton out of the chatbot. As for the 20 questions build, we do know that activity really is more about having a very good training database than anything. It's not really an AI, thinking problem. It's a brute force problem, which is why, 20 questions bots of, a couple, 3 decades ago on the web, they'd always ask for information and store it later, because that would then be used to help recognize the object the next time somebody played. Mass market chatbots are, of course, also mining answers from us as we go and then reflecting those answers back at the next users. They make mistakes and then we correct them, and then they go, oh, okay, I'll reflect that back next time this comes up. A small Z80 chatbot designed to run in isolation obviously cannot do that. Harry R. acknowledges that the chatbot basically just is giving terse 1 or 2 word answers. It is neither a true grammar parser nor a full sentence generator. But if you're into neural network science and you're willing to delve into the grittier details of training data, you might be able to make something out of this Herculean effort.
We have 3 new patrons. Thank you very much for becoming twirlers. To Tommy, DK Hyde, and to Andy. So thank you very much. If you'd like to join them, where would you go, Jason?
You would go to patreon.com/thisweekinretro. Take a look at, there's both monthly and annual options. And we got some recent episodes as well that are Patreon exclusive. So you can get Q&As. You can get us looking back 260 weeks ago into This Week in Retro's past. Quite a bit of activity on there these days.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your support. If you want to support us in other ways, go and leave us a review. Go on your podcast app of choice and leave us a review. We really would like a review to help us spread the word. Also, Duncan, hello Duncan, producer Duncan, found a little video this morning, an interesting one as a follow-up to Stunt Car Racer. Remember we were talking about how Stunt Car Racer would be nicer with more frames? Well, he's found someone doing it for the Amiga. And the goal is to get to 60 frames a second, or perhaps 50. Was it 50 or 60?
60,
a huge number of frames per second for Stunt Car Racer, which I thought had been done already for the Amiga, but it turns out it might not have been. It turns out that all people have done is make the whole thing run faster. I'm not quite sure, but I couldn't get a definitive answer on that this morning before we recorded.
So for the record, this is bonus racing game content that is coming before the racing game content that was promised at the top of the show.
Do you not like Stunt Car Racer?
I like Stunt Car Racer fine. It's just, I just didn't realize that I'd be spending, 15% or more of my time on This Week in Retro talking about racing games.
Well, let's move on then to news in brief. Guess what's coming, Jason?
Oh, guess
the
what?
top submission this week is called Jason Baiting. And I can't help feel you've made a rod for your own back here, Jason. It's an image of a hypothetical Ultima Outrun game. And I would like to point out that there is a sort of game called Auto Duel from Lord British and Chuckles from Origin, which is, I guess you could say that, Outrun and Ultima. So thank you to Lord Borak and also to Jeff Mendoza, who's on the same theme by telling us that there's an Outrun clone called Top Speed due on consoles now, which I'm sure wasn't of that much interest to people, except in winding up poor old Jason.
Honestly, my favorite part of it was you saying, "Oh yeah, Auto Duel is kind of like a mashup of these two games." And people go, "Oh yeah." Yes, there's cars, and yes, there's speed, and yes, there's RPG stats. But I think people expecting the true blend of those are going to be a little disappointed. But yes, thank you so much for those submissions that do in fact help propel us into our 9-bit era with lots and lots and lots of racing game news. Like the news that Namco's brilliant Rave Racer is finally making its way to consoles, and it will come to Nintendo's arcade archives on the 26th of February. Thank you, Lord Borak, for submitting that. Apparently, this was only available in an arcade one-up form, unless we're tracking down the arcade ROMs and things like that. So much more exposure for Rave Racer, which I'm sure is a fine retro racing game.
Yeah, I remember playing it at bowling alleys. It was really loud and brash. It was great fun.
Rave Racer. I never played Rave Racer. Played Ridge Racer.
Yeah, it was a sequel to Ridge Racer.
Rave. Oh, was it?
Which of those two is your favourite, Jason? Ridge Racer or Rave Racer?
I never heard of Rave Racer at all.
No.
I'm sure I saw Ridge Racer at some point, but I'd never heard.
They were really leaning into the kind of the techno soundtrack to it, which I think really helps racing games. All racing games should have techno.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Or really heavy rock and metal. Anyway.
Yeah, something like that. Like yeah.
Cool. All right. Fresh Strain 4024 links us to Sir Clive Sinclair's views on AI and superintelligence. And this is a 1990 interview. So they're talking about it way back then. So that's an interesting article to read.
I'm So Sorry 417 links us to a welcome gift on GOG. Now, I'm not sure if that's always been there, but this is a pack of 4 games you can claim on GOG. I was able to claim it. I've had a GOG account for years and years. And by doing it, you get Lure of the Temptress, which is an excellent point and click, and the Two Worlds of Ultima game, and a game called Betrayer, which I've never heard of. So 3 games. There you go.
On that, Dr. Local, it was massively upvoted, but I think the offer's ended now. They had the Alone in the Dark trilogy for free on GOG as well. But now I think that offer's just ended. But I picked it up, so thank you for posting it in the Reddit. Keep that kind of stuff coming.
And Pajako6502 links us to a PC Gamer article telling us that the Computer History Museum's exhibits can now be viewed online.
Trevor Keverson links us to a BBC Micro-inspired Raspberry Pi 500. We talked about this a couple of months back, but it does seem to be a custom one-of-a-kind thing rather than something you can buy. It does look good, though.
And as a reminder, we're always happy to let people know about meetups that you're organising. And the inaugural meeting of the newly formed UK Amstrad user group, UKAG, UKAG, is on the 21st of June in the Ottershaw Village Hall in Ottershaw in Surrey in England. Roland Perry himself will be present, so he's the creator of the Amstrad, along with others. Links to get tickets in the show notes. So please remind us about this closer to the time so we can again read it out in the show and make sure people don't forget about it, because June's a long time away. And a project that caught my eye at the first Kickstart meeting of 2026. Now, Kickstart is a UK Amiga user group. This isn't Kickstarter crowdfunding. Is a new monitor project in development. Now, it was at the Ottershaw Village Hall, the same place as where the UCAG meet will be. That's a hotbed of retro activity. It's an answer to the question, what if I wanted something that looks like a CRT and fits the look of a retro computer, but I don't want the problems and the space associated with it, with owning a CRT? It's modelled on a 1084SX, which is a very common Commodore monitor that was in the same kind of design language as the C64C, the C128, and of course the Amiga. So it matches all those really nicely. And it is, of course, a flat screen. I'm very interested to see how good they can make it. I know that one of the guys behind it, Lee, has tried using a big lens before to make it look right. Retronaut submitted this and he's working with Lee on the project, and the video shows it looking pretty good. And the intention is that if there's enough interest to make it a product, then maybe they will try and make it a product. They're talking about working with PCBWay in producing it. And leaving room for an ITX board in it or a Mister to go in the back of it. I'm really interested to see how they go on and what steps they try to take and get around the fact that I noticed for the Checkmate monitor, which is a similar project, when you're sitting looking at it, it just seems to look like an LCD. It's great from the side, it's great as furniture in your room, but I'd want somebody who was looking at it, it wouldn't just shout, this is an LCD at me. So good luck to them. We will, of course, update you if this project gets legs and carries on. So good luck to Retronaut and to Lee on this project. There are loads more things to read on the subreddit. If you have some time you want to kill, then have a browse through. And if you want to submit something for us to talk about, then submit it. Have a look through the other things that people have submitted. Click the little arrows to up or down vote the ones you think you'd like us to talk about.
Reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
About 15 years ago, something happened that gave me literal goosebumps, and I think maybe this was my first powerful hit of nostalgia. I heard via YouTube the Megadeth rendition of the Duke Nukem 3D tune, and it floored me. I made it my ringtone, much to my wife's disgust. I made it my morning alarm on my phone. And yes, literally, it gave me chills the first time I listened to it. That rendition was actually released in 1999, but I'd remained blissfully unaware, or maybe I'd simply forgotten it existed. But hearing it again just took me right back to mapping in the build editor and playing through the original game all the way through and wanting to play it again, and once again pining for the release of Duke Nukem Forever, which, to my surprise, actually did follow soon after. And, well, Duke Nukem 3D now celebrates its 30th anniversary. Dr. Local has kindly pointed us towards a documentary about the creation of Duke Nukem 3D on YouTube by Apogee Entertainment to celebrate this milestone. The video is very digestible, 11 minutes long, but packs in the history of Duke as a 2D platformer right from his inception, before he even had a flat top and attitude. And then it leaps forward into the decision to go full 3D, the fact that the devs kept skipping off on their breaks to go and play Doom instead because the game wasn't fun enough at that point, and the prototyping in the build engine by Ken Silverman, and of course the casting of the legendary John St. John, who of course did the voiceover work that makes Duke so special. Before I go on, guys, what is it about Duke 3D that makes it so special 30 years later?
Yeah, I think it was and still is the personality. Like, Wolfenstein 3D was not devoid of personality, and that setting, lends itself for the player to think of the character as a great hero and liberator. But, Wolf 3D gameplay was kind of quirky. There were, side routes to collect treasures and so forth. It kind of had an inconsistency about it. And Doom, I don't know how to put it. the experience of playing Doom is the guns and the music and the shooting.
Heavy metal.
That's
Doom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It invite you to stop and think about who these people are, how any of this came to pass. It's just, here's a gun, here's a barrel, here's monsters, go shoot them.
Portal to Hell on Mars, that's the story.
Yeah. But Duke 3D, like, it's telling a lot of story. And there's the hero that's really oozing with personality. There's levels that convey a sense of place and a point of view and all that good stuff. I mentioned No One Lives Forever recently, and I liked it so much for a lot of the same reasons that I really like Duke 3D. There's well-realized personality, point of view, sense of place.
Yeah, Jason's nailed it. It's just so much fun. It's meant to be fun. It's meant not to take it seriously. The hero is clearly a parody, but they lean into it so well. And Rise of the Triad, I think, has a lot of the same feel to it that Duke 3D does to me. That sense of fun. What other game would have dog mode in it? But I mean, it was originally intended to be the sequel to Wolfenstein 3D. So Rise of the Triad was supposed to be the sequel to that, but they didn't get the license. And because of that, I think that's maybe why they went onto this this kind of parody, tongue-in-cheek thing, which led, I think, to Duke 3D, because the same people, or some of the same people, Scott Miller, George Broussard, worked on both. And they've got the same kind of whole poke the world kind of going on. So Duke 3D is a more polished game, and I think if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose it over Rise of the Triad, even though it doesn't have dog mode.
I don't know why, but I always confuse Rise of the Triad with Shadow Warrior. Yeah, which, to be honest, goes even further on the humour than Duke, I think. Shadow Warrior is so much fun. But for me, I mean, Duke 3D, it came out the same year as Quake, but I've always held that Duke 3D, I held it in a higher regard, even though the technology was not as advanced as Quake. And it comes down to the fact that, like you guys have touched on, it's just so much fun. It was action-packed, and it was fast-paced, but it was just simply hilarious every step of the way. And it was so interactive. You know, you could play pool, you could play arcade machines, you could destroy some of the environment, you could shoot glass windows out, you could break the room lighting. It's just absolutely crazy. The doco that we're talking about, it features appearances from Johnson John, Scott Miller, Apogee founder from Duke Nukem, and Duke Nukem co-creator, Tom Hall, Cliff Bolensky, Ed Fries, YouTuber James Rolfe, who's Angry Video Game Nerd, Ken Silverman, the creator of the Build Engine, Rebecca Heineman, Richard Level Lord Grey, another YouTuber, G-Man Lives, Robert Atkins, and even John Romero, the creator of Doom, who literally praised the interactive environments of Duke 3D, stating they raised the bar when they did that. Which brings me to another story shared with us by Fluffy Rock 62, because John Romero himself has dropped his own documentary about Catacombs 3D. It's first and probably the first texture-mapped first-person shooter released in 1991. This 17-minute documentary features those involved, founding members of id Software, John Carmack, Tom Hall, Adrian Carmack, and of course, John Romero. They detail the history of Catacombs beginning life as a top-down 2D Gauntlet clone, and they also talk about their first 3D game, Hover Tank, their initial experiments with texture mapping, and then into the creation of Catacombs 3D. They also talk about how this led to the more widely recognized Wolfenstein 3D, released in 92, which also actually began life as a 2D franchise. So what I want to pick up on here, guys, is this is an important transition period here that we're talking about. Just like Duke 3D, they're taking a franchise that began life in 2D, and they're then bringing the player inside the game, giving them a first-person view. So my question here is, first of all, other than have you played Catacombs 3D, but what other franchises can you think of that transitioned from 2D to first-person specifically? Not just 3D, but first-person. Jason?
Yeah, when you started formulating the question, my reflexive answer was going to be, everything that Sony made people turn into 3D so they could release that on the PlayStation. But yes, you said first person specifically, so now I'm all tense and can't think straight. But Fallout for sure, although I guess there are hybrid modes. But if you've got a first person mode, even if it's not the only way you can play, I think that's got to count, right? And I mean, and Wolfenstein, like it was not truly an official sequel to the Muse software game, but I mean, it goes from 2D to 3D.
Get the klaxon out. If I had an air horn, I'd sound it right now. Ultima! After making Ultima 6, The False Prophet, Origin commissioned Ultima Underworld. They released it 2 months before Wolf 3D, and it already had things that Wolf 3D didn't have, like verticality, slopes, and textures. It is, of course, a fair bit slower, but that, of course, suits the immersion of the gameplay. It really is. It feels like a simulation of an environment more than just a quick game. The walls in it weren't all straight, so it did feel like a cave. And in fact, when John Carmack saw an earlier demo of Ultima Underworld, it inspired him to write a faster texture mapping engine for Catacomb 3D. Ultima Underworld was a triumph. It still stands up today, and it took dungeon crawling into proper 3D. And what we now see in games like Skyrim, and in fact, I think if we look at all modern gaming, there's a blending of the games that started off with Catacombs 3D and Wolf 3D and so on, along with dungeon crawling games to kind of blend those RPG elements together. And I know that the Elder Scrolls primary, that's what became Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls primary influence was Ultima Underworld. As for Catacombs 3D, I've only played it the past 20 years or so. I was not aware of it at the time, and you know, it appeals to me. The vibe of the game appeals to me more than Wolfenstein 3D. That's more my kind of thing, but I just didn't hear about it at the time. And I think that's probably true for most people, because I don't think Catacombs 3D set the hell on fire in the same way that the Wolf and Doom did, I think.
Yeah, and I forgot to answer your question, Chris. No, I had not played it and still have not.
Yeah,
just got past me.
That's your homework. Never mind that assignment.
All homework. I'm going to throw in a couple of curveballs here to answer my own question. Alien Breed, which is, I'm going to call that as another Gauntlet clone, right? Traditionally in the 2D guys. But that became 3D with Alien Breed 3D for the Amiga coming out in 95 and Alien Breed 3D 2, The Killing Grounds dropping a year later. And here's a real curveball, Missile Command. So we were given Missile Command 3D, which gave the player a first-person view, and that was on the Atari Jag. And that was released also in 1995. I've not played Catacombs 3D yet, but we should be sponsored by GOG, guys, actually, because it's been great learning about the history of Catacombs 3D, but yes, you can get it on GOG, so there's no excuse. We've all got homework to do. As for Duke Nukem 3D, I had great fun playing through that entire game. And that's been worded very carefully because those aren't just my words. Those are also the words of John Romero, creator of Doom. Hail to the king, baby.
Dave from Future Past here. It turns out that we did manage to get a release date for EXO SCUMM VM from EXO before this went to broadcast, and it's going to be today. It's going to be released today. As you're listening to this, you should be able to go and get EXO SCUMM VM, the new version with all the new stuff in it for this new version of SCUMM VM. What a serendipitous time for release. I return you to the past.
So it's time now for our community question of the week. And as always, we'll start by reviewing last week's, which was, if you were given a decent budget and a chance to create a retro tech museum, what historical displays would you create? Dave, are we out of contest mode?
We are.
Fantastic. I'm going to hit F5 on my page then, just so I can have a look.
It says...
Jason should read out the top response.
Sure. Prefim won the day with all the Outrun games and arcades, sit-up, upright, tilting arcades, and the 8/16-bit versions from the shockingly poor C64 and Amiga versions, the somehow not-so-bad Spectrum version, and onto the modern reassembler remake. Or, if Jason doesn't approve of that, machines that didn't make it. Jupiter Ace, New Brain, Hector 2, Taytine Einstein, Elan Enterprise, etc. Machines that were too late to market, too expensive at launch, or too underpowered to compete. And Prefim goes on to say, I have all these in my collection, just no space. Otherwise, I think I'd have set up a museum myself by now. So yes, thank you for really, really working the crowd there.
Nice.
I like Electric Paw's answer. Probably stretching the limits of a decent budget, but I'd love to create a retro holiday park living museum. different cabins or caravans containing versions of living rooms from different eras with period-accurate televisions, consoles, computers, and other gadgets. The holiday park shop would feature retro food, magazines, and of course VHS rentals. The on-site arcade would be filled with games and not a modern prize grabber in sight. Did you get cocktail sticks in the USA with a pickled onion, a bit of cheese, and a bit of pineapple on them? Or is that a British atrocity?
I mean, I feel like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cocktail salads that are put in Bloody Marys and things like that. Yeah.
Oh no, this is something we used to get in the 70s in the UK. It was, you were at a party, you would get a cocktail stick. There would be a cube of cheese, a pickled onion, and a bit of pineapple on it. That was the height. That was the height of food back then, and that's what would be in Electric Paws Holiday Park in one of the cabins.
Okay, I was wondering where the tie-in was going with that. But you're right. Yeah, you need that. You do need that. Jeff Mendoza says, I know I keep going on about this, but it would be a Sega Model 2 arcade line. Virtual Racer.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, well, all the racing games, Jason. Virtual Racing, Sega Rally, Daytona USA, Prop Cycle, various others, including a jet ski one and a skiing one. They were an important part of the early 3D graphics done well, and probably the last time that arcades had a significant technology advance over home console or PC hardware. That's probably true. They also remain rare as arcade cabinets and somewhat tricky to emulate well. Getting the controls configured properly on emulators is still a pain. Of course, you said reasonable budget. To have a decent setup with lots of these machines, their history and assortment paraphernalia would require an unreasonable budget. And you thought I was going to say Outrun. Well,
it's a reasonable point. To be fair, it's a reasonable point. The other one is flight simulators. A museum with the very best flight simulator experience. That would be something, because you can't really get that in the house unless you spend an absolute fortune on it.
That's true. And then we could throw in the Amiga virtuality ones. Although were they PC based by then? You had that Harrier game. No, I think it was one of the first games. So you'd have that in there as well. Fantastic.
A lot of interesting answers. Not all of them based around racing games. However, well, the votes are the votes.
Richard Cheers one. Do you see that one? Into the realm of retro pseudo technology. So all the different things that didn't really exist that were in there.
Very specifically
answers.
Saying recreation of various TARDISes throughout the years.
Yeah.
Like that was
Yeah. Cool.
Interesting.
What should people be answering this week?
Well, this week we have a new
avoid
question.
Doing racing games for the next 256 episodes.
Every time you mention it, Jason, you inspire people to do it again.
I know.
The rod for your back.
I know.
Next question. What modern 3D game would you like to see turned into an 8-bit 2D platformer? Duke
Just
3D.
waiting for all the answers now. Well, actually, I'd really like a 2D version of a racing game.
Outrun.
Yeah, if you see that, it's a bit easy, download it. Yeah.
On a platform.
Thank you for joining us this week. I hope you do have a romantic Valentine's Day, and I hope that this extra special romantic episode today has inspired you for it. We'll see you next week. Maybe a guest next week. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.
They're waving.
We're all waving.
We're all waving.
Everybody's waving.
We've done the thing.
The cats are waving.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 The Gamer, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.